very interesting that I stumbled across an amazing library. If any of you ever come to North Wales, a place called Harden, it's the Gladstone family. They have a beautiful private library. They've just recently opened to the public. And I was blessed this week to find 2 days. I got this beautiful, beautiful house in a country setting where they've got a whole section and annex on the Celtic saints and particularly, excuse me, women in ministry. So let's go back in time a little bit. We're going to go biblical, 3rd, 5th, 7th century. I'm going to jump around a little bit as I do. Lydia. Who was Lydia? She was a very successful businesswoman. She employed many people. Lydia owned a purple cloth company. What did they do? They dyed cloth. It was luxury goods. They would be targeting the high-end market, the high-end price of the market. In that day, purple was used by leaders and rich people. It was a really high-quality fabric. It is said that Lydia owned a large house. She would have travellers, friends to come and stay. And one particular good friend she took care of and tended to his needs was St. Paul, the Apostle Paul. She had servants under her care. Her gift of hospitality was well known. Now just think about it. You think about Bridget, Hilda, so many unnamed Celtic women saints who all became leaders. And what were their qualities? Let's dive in and have a look. But their thread was community, hospitality, looking after people, looking after communities. Not just teaching, but tending to their needs. There would be physicians, artists. Wow. Smart architects. They'd have a business head on them. They would be full of discernment. Women in ministry were held a very powerful, essential position in communities consisting of both men and women. And in the 7th century, they would be called double monasteries. They eventually became a normal feature in both Ireland and England. Bridget of Kildare, an example. Hilda of Whitby, her Anglo-Saxon origins. Most known women led these monasteries. They're the most famous ones thus far, but there will be loads of hidden, unnamed ones. Let's have a look at the daily life. They had separated quarters in these double monasteries. The women, the nuns, lived in the inner sanctuary part. They would come together in communion to sing ligatures, to have teaching, to worship together. The Eucharist, the women would often help the Eucharist, but the priest would serve it. They would prepare the bread and they would prepare the silver and golden plates to celebrate the union, the achad, the common union of Yeshua. Whoa, whoa, whoa. It's interesting, many accounts say that when they came together to worship, there would be like a partition down the middle of the church, of the meeting. They couldn't see each other, but they would be singing in unison. Imagine the chanting and the spirit and the angelic and the cloud of witnesses and the sound and the vibration, the frequency. Wow! And even when they rang the bell to come to prayer, to come into that place together, it would be amazing. As a child of 14 years of age, we lived in a very small village. And they had a beautiful bell tower where there were 7 bells. And I remember at 14 years of age going this windy, windy path, and I'd stand on a box and I learned to ring a bell. I could only ring number 1, 2 or 3 and stand on a box because they were so heavy, because the bells land and you have to ring them up and ring them down on a wooden stay. And sometimes the bell would flip and it would break the stay, and we would then have to go another further bit up this windy staircase to help hold the rope while my dad or the bell ringers who taught us to bell ring would, it's called campanology, would put a brand new wooden stay to flip the bell, to hold the bell off when it was rung up and then rung down. And the rope would come down, this beautiful entwining blue and red and white Sally, a furry bit. You pull the rope and then you do it once and again it goes up. Oh my goodness, brings back memories. They probably had handbells, I don't know. Well, it is interesting that the influence of these powerful women was incredible. And perhaps later on in the 12th century, like Teresa of Avila and Catherine of Siena, we have stories of their absolute devotion to Yeshua in the place of affection, in the place of union. Whoa, and they centered on Jesus Christ. They're one and only virtuous women. They would be taken into that place of rapture. And it is said that Teresa could not stay on the ground. She would lift up off the ground in levitation. They would have to pull her back down. It's incredible. But it was not always an easy life. Sexuality in the early church was really difficult. Women were often met with vehement condemnation from church authorities. They would be judged. There would be protests brought against them at the synod. And many disagreements broke out, particularly in 664, the synod at Whitby. Disagreements over women in ministry and other situations. Nuns were made subordinate to male priests. But as Christianity began to take over from paganism, things began to change. Because women, interestingly, I found this really interesting, what would they have done without the women? The women would accompany the priests, the missionaries. There's loads of evidence that they travelled with these men, these holy men of God. Look at the relationship with Aidan, Martin of Tours, Patrick with Bridget, their relationship where they honoured the women. And that I am sure there's many accounts of, remember these are folk tales sent down through the ages, that they would speak up for them and try and stand up for their rights. Does this not sound like some of the situations in today in some nations where women are sold for $1? One example surprised me that I found in this very, very old book in the library in Harden. Excuse me. St. Columba. Did you know that on the island of Iona, I couldn't find the date, but he deported cows and women from the holy island of Iona. I'm not sure for what reason, but it's a fact. It's incredible. I think the problem was with a lot of the Celtic women, they were very spiritual, dreams and visions, and their renaissance, their renaissance with creation and nature, their relationship as they tilled the land, they fed themselves, just like the male monks. They farmed, they ploughed, they planted, they reaped. They had massive respect. They would go out into communities like Aidan and Martin of Tours, heal the sick, raise the dead. They were like physicians. They knew all the different plants and herbs to help people. They would give to the poor and tend for their needs. But they would come back in that place of devotion to their Lord and King, and everything flowed out of that place in their hearts. It's interesting today, when we think about this, the appeal for many of us that are concerned about ecological survival, the planet, the revitalization of our faith, of church. Many people don't even believe in God anymore. The quality of our own spirituality. Many keys of discernment and wisdom and integrity we can learn for our own lives and ministry from this era of the Celtic era. We only have to look about us in this beautiful land of creation, and this will lead beautifully into the teaching and to share together about our relationship with creation. I love this story in the 5th century about an Irish monarch, a king, and his beautiful, virtuous daughter who did not want to be married. Now, if you've seen the key here, many of these women who became leaders, named or unnamed, fathers tried to force them to marry a druid or a noble or someone else. And what did they do? They took a vow. They joined the order of nuns to escape this. Let's have a little look at one such lady. Melangel, her name was, in the 7th century. Now, she ran away from Ireland all the way to North Wales, and I lived just over the border into North Wales, and I went to have a look at the church that she built there, on the very spot that this beautiful prince was out hunting one day. She was so upset about this forced marriage that when she came to North Wales, she did not look on the face of a man for 15 years. She became a hermit. And one day, after fleeing from her father's dominion, she was out, and it says in all the different versions that I read, it was epic, there's some of these stories, that she was in deep devotion. She was so caught up, like many of the saints we read about, in that place of union with Jesus Christ, that she did not notice this prince. His name was Raphael, hunting with his wild hounds. They would be loud. When I was a child, it was called the hunt. We lived in this village where all the dignitaries would come on their horses in their red jackets and black jackets with their children as well, and it would be so noisy, and we'd give them sherry in glasses, and it would be very, very posh. The Duke of Westminster, who my father helped as a gamekeeper and worked there as a part-time job as well as his main job. But he was very kind to my dad. He'd let us hunt the rabbits and pick all the wild mushrooms and nuts, and he would bring presents to our family when we were young children. And I know what it's like to see hounds chasing rabbits and hares and foxes. It's horrible. At the time though, I just thought it was normal everyday life. So she was so caught up in rapture and ecstasy, she didn't hear him coming. The hare was so afraid and was attracted, it says, to her virtue. It hid under her cloak. Some versions say her robes. The fierce hunting hounds, the dogs, were pursuing the hare. It says Raphael, with all his strength and sportsmanship, to seize the dogs from trying to catch their prey, and would have attacked. Whoa, the beautiful maiden. He blew his horn. It stuck to his lips because obviously the presence of the Holy Spirit and heaven was surrounding her. This story became quite famous. She began to talk to him. Remember, 15 years since she'd laid eyes on the face of a man. And she told her tearful story of how she'd run away and left her land to come to North Wales. She wouldn't even know anybody there. And did she come on a little boat, a little coracle? The Irish Sea can be very, very rough in winter. We don't know what time of the year she arrived in North Wales. It is a beautiful place. And so he was so captivated by her beauty and her purity. He gave her the parcel of land, the very spot she was praying on. And this became a sanctuary for all who were fleeing and needed sanctuary. She became the founder of an abbey, an abbess or chieftain, a leader, and she lived to a good old age. Wow, how awesome is that? The name of these leaders in modern times, as we know of convents, are Mother Superior. They were known in the Celtic era, mothers of teachers, a shepherd, a physician, a teacher, a mother to the sisters, meaning the nuns under her care. Wow. So we're just going to have a little bit more jumping in to some examples. And one example I'm going to use is that strong, crazy, buoyant personality. Good heavens, what a woman she was, and the Christian women that she attracted around her. Bridget of Kildare and her sister saints. They became famous. People would be talking about them all over to the Mediterranean because, as you know, the Roman women, when they got married, literally gave up their life for the family of the man they married. Their land, their life, they were almost like slaves. They did not have this freedom and spirituality and buoyancy that the Celtic women freely had. They could own land, they could marry, they could have children, they could own businesses, they could go away and the community would look after them. They would come back and they were greatly respected. They were set apart. They would live slightly out of the main towns and villages because they needed that time and seclusion to pray and to discern the will of their Father, their Lord and King. And as we know, they were a remnant, a small group of people, but they influenced large sections of community and society to today. We can learn so much from their wisdom and discernment and apply it to our lives today. Wow, they definitely did leave their mark all over the nation, particularly the UK. They left crosses, monasteries, churches. They were incredible. The stories of the healing, signs and the wonders is incredible. Wow, wow, wow. So they generally have the same type of personalities. Buoyant, strong-willed, like the story that we've already studied of earlier on in my sessions of Bridget of Kildare. I just love her. Life would not be easy, but she set herself apart. She'd be set in a monastic community. The remnant, the small group, the influencer. Patrick, Columba and Bridget and many others heard the call from Yahweh as these women did. Unknown, like Brendan, the wild goose he was known as, AD 486. To be over the land, governing it, looking after it, caring for the land for many, many years. I didn't realise that Brendan lived for over 90 years of age. Wow, 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 wow. Bridget and many of the women spread out Christianity through the Wild Islands. They were responsible as much as Aidan, Martin of Tours, St Ninian, all these different people, Cuthbert. They were just as much connected with the monastic settlements as they were. Small groups, home groups, large monasteries sprung up. But I visited recently some of the small churches in North Wales of some of these women leaders, abbesses, and they're tiny little churches, really, really small, but they would grow and grow and grow. Wow. St. Paul, despite the dangers and the risks in allowing women converts freedom to roam errands of mercy, these were the nuns and sisters, and people that converted to Christianity from paganism, and they would go out into the land. They would have to watch how they dressed and what they did, but he was always allowing them and giving them more and more freedom and trust. The sexual morality was deplorable in those days. There was one thing though I read in many writings that he insisted with these women, that they generally would practice as far as they could to be and dress solemnly, so as not to attract attention of the men to themselves. They had common sense. They cultivated a very quiet manner, modelled by St. Paul. They dressed in sombre clothes, as we said, resulting in St. Paul's combined courage and common sense. Christian women began to win their freedom. And you know what? Lots of accounts say that Christian men, understandably, quite resented these new breed of women. So let's look at some more examples of women in ministry. St. Jerome found Paulus an excellent, variable head of business. She was incredible. He persuaded her and her daughter to leave Rome to help him found his monastery near Bethlehem. Jerome was a difficult, irritable genius. A lot of geniuses, quite irritable and annoying. Paula complains about him quite a lot, but you know, they really were really good friends. So many women joined her to Bethlehem, founding her own monastery as well. So she helped build a monastery using her architectural mind, wisdom, discernment, understanding. And I believe as we get blueprints from heaven, we get downrolled and we unravel our scrolls, that she would be in that place of devotion, in that place of intimate relationship with Yahweh, the angelic and the cloud of witnesses and unusual beings, and many, inventive thoughts would be downloaded into her heart. She would have I would think she would be a professor of her profession. In the 5th century, St. Patrick arrived in Ireland. He found that the Celts had long respected their women, an important part of the community. They even let the women in that era, in the 5th century, same with Bridget, Hilda of Whitby, seemed to be a turn in the 5th century. The respect began to grow, and that some of them were allowed to attend public assemblies, enjoying, surprisingly, an amount of power and independence. Incredible. The Celtic era was incredible for spurring women on, for encouraging them, for bringing them into their true identity of who they were and what they are. But the other side of it was the persecution and the insults and the vehement deplority of judgment and injustice in and around their lives, whether they were leaders or not. Much of the women's work was interesting, creative, and it was hard work. Indeed, the only member of the sect who deserved pity were the female slaves. Oh my goodness. They were treated simply as bits of property, very much like the Roman imperial women. They endured the most terrible threats and terrors. Oh my goodness. Some of the accounts were too upsetting to read and to read out. But with the Lord's grace, many of the converts they called them handmaidens, with St. Paul, Bridget, Hilda and many other unknown faces of women, worked very, very hard to bring them freedom. Wow, freedom fighters. Women of justice, women of power, women of judgment. Now, I've been reading as well for a while now, about all the symbols and the numbers and the sounds and what the trees meant in the Celtic era, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in our next teaching. We're going to move that into relationship with creation. I'm going to share some personal and also some incredible stories. We just heard about Magella and what happened with her and the hair. With the Lord's grace, the Lord's hand. Wow, it's beautiful. We've covered the main life of Bridget, but let's look at her character in relation to ministry and the devotion to God. I found some facts out here, which is a thread right across a lot of the Celtic women and the Celtic era, through the different centuries, right down through the ages to the dissolving of the monasteries. They endured persecution from kindred, from family, not just leaders in religious orders. Her kindness and compassion was irresistible. Her gaiety, her determination, her incorrigible generosity. We know she used to give away all the food out the palace, the gold, the silver. Remember, she gave away her father's sword when she was sat in the chariot one day when he was trying to sell her off to a druid, and a beggar came and she gave this incredible sword away that her father prized from battles, and he had a lot of honour with that sword. Oh my goodness. She had some drive. She had an influential mindset. Numerous bishops she knew and she was popular with. She was a networker. She knew how to network, but not through her own self-power and self-seeking, but through the heart of Yahweh, to spread the gospel, to spread the good news of Jesus Christ and salvation for your souls through the land and through the nation. She had one mission only: to teach and preach the gospel and to care for the poor and the needy and for one another. She started a great work. The First Order of the Saints, it was called, in Kildare and Ireland. And remember, all those druids that were there, those sacred magical oak trees, she took over, and it says that the presence of God was in the land. Religion of Jesus Christ spread throughout Kildare. Once recognised the crying, once she recognised the crying innovation, so invaluable Christian, the havens for the poor, the sick, the tired and the traveller. She made community, they called them havens, settlements, for people to come, just like we read in the beginning of Lydia. You see the thread? Right down through these women, down through the ages of hospitality. Schools for prospective converts, for children who couldn't read or write, and particularly women who would have absolutely no education and their life would be of slavery. And we know that Aidan, on Lindisfarne, he attracted young men and he taught them skills and bravery and the word of the Lord, and discipline to pray, to worship, and to lead holy lives, to become good leaders, to care for the broken-hearted. Did you know the word Kilbride, Kilbreedis, meaning the cell, which is where the nuns, their little rooms they slept in, or churches of St. Bridget? It's interesting it's called a cell, that one room, a cell of a prison. But it wasn't a prison in the monastery, it was a place of Yahweh's presence and love and devotion for one another. Yeah, it was hard, but they loved, and their devotion to God was incredible. I loved it when I went to this library. You're not even allowed to whisper. If you have a drink, you have to have your drink on the floor so you don't spill it and make a noise. It's complete, utter silence. And I had a glimpse of what it must have been like in the monasteries. Whoa, in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century. Yay. What a privilege. What an honour. Now, she was very brave. Now, in those days in Ireland, did they have nice concrete roads and tarmac roads and tracks? No. There were loads of crazy, huge, dark forests. Peat bogs everywhere. Now, I know about peat bogs. My friends in the very far north of Ullapool, above Ullapool, of Roggett in Scotland, there's a road that connects the land. They have just built a well. They've got 12 acres of land and they're building a community. There are pictures, it's a peat bog, where farmers have left trailers and tractors, and over time they have sunk completely into the bog. That'd be pretty treacherous, wouldn't it? On a chariot, a horse and cart. Lonely mountains in the 5th century of Ireland. There would be discord. Murderers, robbers, often trying to attack these women. Discord, fighting between different chiefs and clans. Oh my goodness. Mishaps, misadventures. But Bridget always arrived at her destination. Sometimes bruised, battered, cut. The sisters and the sacred women she would choose to go with her, can you imagine? It says that a lot of them got injured, but they all showed up to their destination, tired, hungry, but ready to minister the heart of Yahweh. We get grumpy when we've been in the car and maybe the aircon hasn't worked and we're hot and thirsty and hungry. Imagine the storms in the elements. They went out in all weathers. Any season. Incredible. They learned how to delegate like Moses did. Now remember, Moses, they were wearing him out, it says, doesn't it? With their complaining, their moaning, constant moaning, until his father-in-law Jethro came. His son-in-law, sorry, not his father-in-law, his son-in-law. And he brought some great wisdom and discernment. Appoint leaders, train them over 20s, 50s, hundreds, thousands. It's incredible. And so there's the biblical pattern right through down the ages of delegating, of training, of positioning and leading people and appointing them as chieftains. Yay! And the women. And this is, wow, it's incredible. So Bridget was a very, very, very smart lady. She appointed Con, I think his name's Con Leith, a monk, how you pronounce it, famous for his distinguished metal work. Now you know where this is going, don't you? He was a consecrated man unto the Lord. He founded a school where he taught his beautiful arts. It was so successful, they have found artifacts and digs and discovered some of the handbells, the staffs, beautiful golden chalices and silver plates, chalices book rests. Those beautiful, have you ever seen them in the church where you've got a huge eagle at the front of these beautiful churches? And there's the like copper or bronze or metal cover on this huge big Bible. They are gorgeous. And he had the pattern for these. They were sent all over the land. Do you think they sold them? Maybe they did, for money for the monastery and to help the poor. But they were treasured and kept and sent all over Britain. So many of these artifacts, bells, books, covers, silver plates, chalices have been found. Whoa. It's beautiful, isn't it? And you know, the Celts were really, really keen astrologers in the sense that they knew the times and the seasons. And many of the Celts came from the Druids. And so they would understand the stars, the star signs, the patterns. They found the remains in one part of Scotland of sundials. They reckon they were most probably used to tell what time the bell would ring for the different services of the monasteries and the churches and the settlements. And of course we know the shadow of the sundial. There's lots of sundials on stone walls in many of the churches in and around where I live, and I'm sure where some of you live, if you live in the United Kingdom or even in Europe. It would tell the time and the season as the sun would go up and the sun would go down, and it would shine a shadow upon the sundial. So these patterns that we have seen right the way through from Lydia to Hilda, to Bridget, to the unknown names and faces, to Martin of Tours, Aidan, Cuthbert, Brendan, whoa, the Wild Goose, the Wild Wanderers. You can learn so much from them, from this time and in this season. I just want to share a story about the duties of women in the 12th century. Now, many of you will have heard of this incredible woman, Hildegard, in 1098 to 1179. She lived in Germany on the Rhine. She was known for her prophetic insight and mysterious visions during her life. It is said that she was a miracle worker. Wow. A poet, a preacher, a theologian, a pharmacist, a composer. These were all women in ministry. All women in ministry. An author, an artist. It is said that Hildegard's visions caused her to see humans as living sparks, wow, of God's love. I can imagine. I always find it interesting because over the years with Ian Clayton, he would say that he would see a dancing fire, whether it was high, low or just sparked. He would know your relationship with Yahweh, your spark, whether you were engaging with what he was saying in his teaching at the time and with Yahweh himself. I remember a time where Yahweh would show me like gems, a bit like the stones on the ephod of the priest. And I could look at people and I would see whether their stones were alight or dim and which ones were alight. And Yahweh would show me wisdom, prudence, understanding, and different things. It was quite an amazing time. I didn't tell people, but I would be like, wow. And just in the spirit, encourage it and just love the person and honour them. And so, Hildegard from the Rhine in Germany had visions where she would see us and see people as loving sparks of God's love. coming from God as a daylight comes from the sun, it says. Wow, that easy. As the night turns to day. Sin destroyed the original harmony of creation. Christ's redeeming death, resurrection opens up new possibilities. Virtuous living reduces the estrangement from God, others that sin causes. In other words, the resurrection, the redeeming life of Christ, she believed opened up the possibilities of living a virtuous life, a life lived in union, common union, like the Celtic women, the women of ministry. Wow, of the Celtic era, into that place of loving kindness for one another. So today, my question is, where are you placed? What have we learned from these women in ministry? They endured persecution. They often lived away from their families. I've lived away from my family on and off for like 12 years, doing mission work over and travelling. And now I'm in a place of living nearer them. And yeah, I didn't find it easy, but I wasn't in a monastery away from them, never seeing them, like some of these incredible women who devoted their whole lives to the love of God and to the works of the cross. Influential mindsets. Bridget started the great work called the First Order of the Saints. She attracted women from miles around. Paulus, remarkable business head. Many of you have not even tapped it in to what Yahweh has for you today. The downloads, the blueprints, the scrolls, the understanding, the wisdom and the prudence. Out of that place of friendship with Yahweh. The women attracted the women. And we are brilliant, aren't we, at networking and friendship with one another. They heard the cry, like so many of the Celtic saints, and off they went. I read somewhere where it talked about, it was almost like they had blind faith. They read it in scripture, they read the Psalms, they believed it, and they just did it. I can be quite like that. I have a very adventurous spirit, but I do have to think, should I, shouldn't I? Some of the time. Sometimes I don't, I just do it. My daughter's like, oh, Mum. Other times I'm just like, should I, shouldn't I? But these knew their God and King. They knew deep in their very hearts who they were, what they were, and what was the purpose of their lives. How rewarding it must have been for Aidan with the school for those young men. How? They didn't have a mobile phone. There was no TV, there was no advert, there was no Instagram, Facebook. They just heard the call in the spirit. Brendan, the wild goose. So today, I leave you with this thought. And I bless you. I bless all that Yahweh has entrusted you with. In creation, in nature, in the world around you, in your families, in your businesses, in your everyday life.